Hello and welcome to Health Innovators. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief of PharmaForum. I'm joined today by two members of the leadership team at Cytokinetics. We've got Dr. Fady Malik and Dr. Stephen Heitner. Fady is the EVP of Research and Development, and Stephen is a VP of Clinical Research and Therapeutic Area Lead for Cardiovascular. Welcome to the show, guys.
Great to be here.
So tell me about Cytokinetics. You guys are in the sort of neuromuscular area. What's the big innovation behind the company? How did you guys get started? Tell me the story.
Well, sure, I can start. I think, Cytokinetics, this is our 25th year of existence. We began as a company focused on developing novel therapeutics that targeted an area of biology called the cytoskeleton, and muscle, and the sarcomere, is sort of a subspecialization of the cytoskeleton. And over the last couple decades, we've really focused on that structure as a vehicle for developing new medicines that treat a variety of both cardiovascular and neuromuscular diseases. We're now a company of about 400 people located in South San Francisco, with end-to-end capabilities from concept to research through to development and hopefully commercialization soon. And we've put into the clinic just this year our 10th molecule that has entered development. We have a portfolio of early and late stage programs, all of which modulate muscle in one way, shape, or form to treat a variety of potential conditions.
You want to add anything, Stephen?
Yeah, I'll just say that you mentioned neuromuscular as the kind of focus of Cytokinetics, which is true. I mean, we do have a robust neuromuscular program, but we're also very much interested in cardiovascular, with the heart muscle obviously being a principal determinant of life. So, Cytokinetics is very much focused on that too. And that's where I play.
So one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you guys is your team sent me this model of a sarcomere, and I was hoping you could kind of tell me what I'm looking at here and walk me through this, and maybe talk a little bit about why the sarcomere is important, and how you guys are interacting with it in your work.
Sure. Well, what you're holding there is a fundamental unit of muscle. So muscle, if you look at it under a microscope, you see millions of those units there, sarcomeres, arranged end to end in a way that allows the muscle to contract. And the way that it does contract is that it has motors, which are the green hands that are reaching out of that thick filament in the middle. They hydrolyze ATP, which is the energy source, and they use that energy to move that motor head and pull on that purple filament, which is called actin. So actin is the roadway, myosin is the motor, and it's really a tug of war. Myosin pulling on the actin filaments, and those two discs, the clear discs at either end, will pull together when muscle is activated to contract. And that interaction is regulated by the purple proteins that decorate the actin filaments. That's called the regulatory complex. And it renders that actin-myosin interaction sensitive to calcium, so that muscle contraction and skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle is triggered by an electrical wave that results in calcium release. And that calcium release is the signal that troponin transduces to turn on the actin filament and allow myosin to pull on it and shorten the muscle. So that little biological machine is what keeps us alive and allows us to do all the things that we do.
And this is in every muscle in the body, right? Including the heart?
The cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle. We have other muscles that are called smooth muscles. Those are the muscles that line blood vessels or airways. They actually work a little differently. They're not organized like sarcomeres, but so sarcomeres are specializations in skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle.
So what happens when this machine is broken? What in the conditions that you guys treat? Why isn't it working like it should?
Well, we are pursuing one particular disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, where the machine is broken. And maybe I'll turn it over to Steve. He's an expert in that area. He can describe a little bit of what's broken in the sarcomere.
Sure. So, the model that you were holding in your hand, it's basically distilling many years of work, decades and decades of scientific discovery. And really what you have over there is the end product of what our genetic information codes for. So each one of those colorful structures that you had over there is essentially coded for by genes in the nucleus of our cells. And in particular with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is technically a monogenic disease. It's a disease that we think is the result of a single mutation in one of those genes encoded over there. There are several that actually account for the actual disease itself, but one mutation in an individual patient can result in that person and, in fact, their family members being at risk for developing hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And really what hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is a condition where that mutation results in hypercontractility. So the muscle cell actually becomes overactive. And there's a whole host of downstream effects of that, but ultimately what ends up happening is the muscle wall starts to thicken over time. And the majority of patients who have what we call phenotypic hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, that means the physical manifestation of the disease, those patients have obstruction to blood flow out of the heart to the rest of your body. And you can imagine it's almost like a situation like a garden hose. So if you were out in your backyard watering your flowers or whatever with a garden hose, and you obstructed the flow of water coming out of that garden hose with, say, your thumb, you'd have pressure build up behind your thumb, and the water would kind of spray out with greater velocity. Now, in hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, that's pretty much what happens as blood is leaving the ventricle of the heart to the rest of your body. And you can imagine if you have buildup of pressure inside your heart, that's going to have symptoms. So patients tend to complain of things like shortness of breath and fatigue. They're not getting enough blood flowing around the body. It's inefficient. Some patients will complain of abnormal heartbeats or palpitations. Some patients complain of chest pain or lightheadedness and fainting. And these are the physical manifestations of ultimately what was the genetic mutation that caused the whole downward or downstream effects of that. So I think that kind of is a fairly simple but elegant way of explaining, what Fady was referring to when he said, the machinery is broken.
Maybe just let me add one thing, and that is that it's really one of the few examples of a medical disease where you can take a mutation that causes a abnormality in the function of a protein, and you can measure the biological effect it has in not just at the molecular level, but at the cellular level, at the organ level, and ultimately in the whole, in the whole human. So it's really an end-to-end disease. that we have a fundamental understanding of, and obviously we're working on means of trying to address that.
Right, and let's talk a little bit about that. You guys have aficamten, which is a myosin inhibitor, and that's in phase 3 right now.
That's correct. Yeah, aficamten is a small molecule drug, meaning that it's kind of a typical pill that you might take. And it is a direct inhibitor of cardiac myosin, the myosin that exists in the heart. So it binds to that myosin head, those green heads that were shown in the model there, and it locks it in a position that is unable to grab that actin filament. And so, you have fewer myosin heads that can participate in every cardiac contraction. And so you reduce the force the sarcomere can produce. And as Steve described earlier, the disease is a condition where the sarcomere is generating too much force as a result of mutations that have unbalanced the sarcomere and biased it towards a greater than normal force producing machine.
You also have a myosin activator. So is that for different kind of condition malfunction entirely?
Exactly. So in many people, the most common kind of heart failure is that where the heart muscle is damaged in some way, shape, or form. Not maybe through mutations, but more commonly through heart attacks or viral infection or longstanding hypertension. It results in what's called heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, which basically means that people develop the symptoms of heart failure because their heart can't contract strongly enough to eject enough blood out and supply the body's needs. So we developed a myosin activator. In that case, it takes some of the spare capacity in the sarcomere, because not all the myosin heads are active all the time, but it binds to that myosin head and it positions it in such a way that it's more likely to be able to bind to the actin filament when the cardiac contraction starts. And so you get more hands on the rope as opposed to fewer hands on the rope. And like a tug of war, more hands on the rope generates more force and it improves the function of the heart. And so we've developed both activators of myosin, inhibitors of myosin to address conditions where heart muscle function is reduced and address conditions where heart muscle function is abnormally increased. All to which, try and restore balance to the system and make it work better.
So I want to change the subject a little bit because on Health Innovators, we really like to talk about not just the work and what you do, but how you do it. What's your approach to innovation? I've spent a little bit of time on your website, which is great, by the way. It's very it's very educational and sort of seems like something designed for patients to actually learn about these conditions and what they mean. And I noticed you guys seem to have a strong focus on the patient experience and patient centricity. You put out a white paper a couple of years ago. Talk to me a little bit about that and how you kind of keep the patient in mind and involved in the work that you do.
Well, so we always keep the patient central to how we think about the diseases that we want to address. Many of us have in this area practiced medicine and interacted with these patients directly. But more than that, many in our company don't have that experience, and so we bring patients in to talk about their disease and how it affects them. There's nothing. Everybody works very hard at what we do here, but it's frankly abstract to a lot of people because they've never met somebody that has heart failure or never met somebody that has HCM or has ALS. And we strive to bridge that gap by bringing the patient to our staff to hear their stories and how the disease affects them. And these diseases obviously have impacts, tremendous impacts on their ability to function, to live their lives, to enjoy their families, and inspires us every day to keep pressing forward. What we do is very, very difficult. I don't think another industry where 90% failure rate is the norm, which means that 90% of the time what we do fails to reach the market. And so this is really tremendous motivation for pressing forward against those odds.
Maybe I'll just add a little bit to that. Fady kind of described the company's dedication to patients, but what he didn't mention is that because of that dedication, something that I've noticed, I've only been at the company for 3 years now, but something that I've noticed is not only is the company dedicated to the patients, it attracts individuals who are like-minded or have family members or themselves, for example, who have personal experiences with these particular diseases. And I think that kind of symbiosis, where you have a company who's dedicated, to serving patients, and the attraction of individuals who are equally or potentially more dedicated to that particular disease state, it kind of creates this energy, and for lack of a better word, fortitude to moving forward, despite the headwinds that Fady just described. And I think that that's absolutely necessary if you are intending on bringing forth a new treatment for these patients.
Great. Anything else you guys want to share about the company culture or your approach to innovation that you think is interesting, or that other companies might be able to learn from?
Well, let me address each of those topics. So, in terms of innovation, we've been very focused on developing new mechanisms of action. We really believe that the biggest leaps forward in medicine are because of new mechanisms of action that come in to address disease. And innovation is tough. It's easier, if you will, to follow in someone else's footsteps. But we've worked hard to develop this area of biology for the first time in a way that can be applied to heart disease, to ALS, to other neuromuscular diseases. And so it's not being afraid to push the envelope, to think of new ways of doing things, to solve problems, to develop the relationships both inside and outside the company that help us bring forward the science that we have. It's a team sport. There's no one single person here that can really say they're responsible for the success of the company. And in the ultimate team sport, there's so many disciplines that are required, from the chemist, the biologist, the drug metabolism people, the formulators, the people that manufacture the drugs, and people like Steve that help us develop the drugs, ultimately the people that help us commercialize the drugs, because we do have to get them to patients. All of those things make it the ultimate team sport. And that segues to culture, in that recognizing that we all have to work together, we have to have fun together. It's a long road. We've been doing this a long time. We have to be able to enjoy all the steps along the way, because our successes, if you were to only mark our successes by marketed drugs, are far and few in between. And obviously there are many steps in between that where we can celebrate our successes and sometimes mourn for our failures, and come together as a company to support each other through those difficult times and to celebrate the exciting times. Having been here since the start of the company, I always feel the people we work with are the most important thing. And Steve as a newer member may see it a little differently, but that's from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think we recently went through a work stream within the company to kind of try and distill exactly what Fady had said into our 3 core values. And really, I think that we did a decent job of that by kind of stating, number one, as we've already mentioned, patients are our North Star. That is what gets us out of bed in the morning and doing the hard work that we need to. But realistically, science is in our soul. This is who we are. And as Fady mentioned a minute ago, essentially the we is greater than me. So it's a team sport, and that's really how we make it happen.
Well, thank you guys both so much. This has been really interesting, and it's great to get to know a company in the space that wasn't as familiar to me before, and hopefully people enjoyed learning a little bit about the cytokinetics, a little bit about the sarcomere, and a little bit about your guys' approach to innovation and patient centricity.
Wonderful. We thank you for your interest and appreciate your time.